Hello, welcome to Staring Down the Storm, Autism Advocacy in America. I'm your host, Tabitha Ziegler. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. We have a really neat guest today. I'm going to let her introduce herself. Bella, introduce yourself to everyone.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bella Bautista, and I'm the official Democratic nominee for House District 14, located in Cartersville, Georgia. I'm
That's
so
awesome.
glad to be here.
Well, we're so glad to have you. So tell us a little bit about your origin story.
So, I am a nonprofit executive. I decided to get into politics because I really want to be able to represent and bring, a new generation of leadership to our state capital. I believe that our leadership right now is not the best considering who they're funded by and where their interests are. So I've always been a community driven person, a populist minded person. So I'm doing this because I believe that this is the next best step for my journey to be the best representation for my community.
Okay, so let's dive into that a bit more because I'm part of the LGBTQ plus community, and I'd like to hear how you plan to serve that community in particular in Washington.
Okay. Um, well, I do happen to be trans. So that's the big thing.
Well, I was going to let you tell your own story. I was just trying to give you an introduction.
Yeah, no, of course. I think right now is just a time where we're facing an unprecedented amount of attacks, especially when it comes to the trans community. And I think unfortunately the representation hasn't been the best slash hasn't been there at all. So at the Georgia State Capitol, I have testified against anti-trans bills in the past. And I said, you know what? I can envision myself actually working here and being on the floor and, being that point of contact for all lawmakers, Republican or Democrats, be like, hey, you have a trans person here who you're able to ask these questions to. Let's not be ignorant and let's use all resources that are, available to us.
How do you think that plays out in the South? Because I know we all have our particular discriminatory pockets. And being from Georgia right now, with some of the issues going on with women and reproductive rights and trans rights, LGBTQ rights, um, I would imagine that's quite profound that you stepped forward, considering the current political circumstances.
Yeah, I think I hear a lot like, oh my gosh, you're so brave and things like that. But for me, I'm doing it from a point of survival as well, right? Because yes, I do happen to be trans, but it's like there's other environmental things that are plaguing my community, like the invasion of data centers that is going to impact our water. In Cartersville, Georgia, our water is actually very cancerous, and people don't know that because we're surrounded by carpet companies that just dump their excess water into our rivers, into our water system. And so, what I tell people is my identity does not affect my ability to do my job, just like your identity does not affect your ability to do yours. So, yes, I do happen to be trans and I'm proud to be that representation. But also, I encourage people to look beyond that and to look at what I actually stand for at my campaign.
Right. How long has your family been in Georgia? A long time?
Yes, a very long time. I'm first generation, but as long as I can remember, we've always been in Georgia. My entire family were proud private property owners here in Georgia. We live like 5 minutes from each other. So yes, we've definitely set down our roots here.
Well, I think right now it's very interesting to have a diverse group of people joining the races, just very normal people. But I asked you that specifically because sometimes it seems like the congressional representatives aren't of the people or aren't necessarily living in that district. So, is there anything else in particular that you feel like is special about that district that you may know that is different than your opponents?
Well, that is a complex question. Let me think about that for a second. My opponent, let's see. Well, I would say that. There are amazing congressional candidates that have made it past primary here. One of them is Chris Hardin, who's running for the congressional district of 11, which represents Bartow County, where I live. I would be a state legislator, so representing Adairsville. So I would say there is kind of that nuance where it's like the congressional district goes all the way down to basically Metro Atlanta, where we are more so in the rural area. So, of course, there's going to be, a matter of being overshadowed or overlooked. And that's one of my talking points as well is, in my city, we're welcoming hundreds of millions of dollars in development projects. We deserve a seat at the table. It's not just about Atlanta, it's about communities all over the state that are being impacted by today's issues.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we need more normal people in those seats representing people that are of the area. I asked that question because I'm from a very rural area myself. And in Indiana, at least, you don't necessarily have to live in district to represent different pockets. So I think it's really good when you can get people that are speaking from experience, that are from those areas, that understand the plight of the people there. So, is there anything in particular that you're hearing from your constituents that they wish to see in their representation?
I think right now it's just such a difficult time because people are starting to realize the impact that money and influence has in politics. Right now, there's dark money that's plaguing our elections in the form of sports betting lobbyists. And it's impacting the Democratic Party as well because they are essentially taking out incumbents that have fought for marginalized communities in the name of legalizing sports betting. So I think people are just starting to wake up in my district in regards to, you know, taking notice of money in politics, and people are fed up with it to the point where they're willing to switch sides and vote for a Democrat leader, someone who's not corporate funded, someone who's not funded by billionaires because they want someone who represents them and their values.
Right. Um, so you talked a little bit about data centers and the quality of the water. What other health issues are you seeing in your area that attribute to those data centers that are concerning people?
I would say the number one thing is noise. So there are studies coming out slowly but surely, studies coming out showing the significance that it has on people's health because listening to that noise all day, because unfortunately, I don't know, well, I do know who is approving it, but the zoning in my city is just so random because you will leave your residential street and there's like all these warehouses and people are saying that data centers are being built in front of their homes. So it's like, okay, like there wasn't much thought put into this. It was more so, hey, they're going to bring all that's money. Let's bring them in, right? Because, unfortunately, we have been conditioned to believe that if we let these corporations have their way, that they will pass it on to the residents, that they will give us all amazing jobs and amazing benefits, and we will have an amazing life. And, in reality, that's not what's happening. So I would say that noise is the number one thing. And the agricultural land right now, there's a big push to get rid of agricultural land and make room for these corporate developments. And I think that's something that's very alarming because, as someone said, you cannot eat a phone charger. You know what I'm saying? Like, we need to really, as a country, as a state, as a community, put a priority on our local farmers who are feeding us and who are contributing to the beautiful landscape that makes us us.
Yeah, I agree with you. I actually had an interesting conversation with some other rural content creators, and one of them is in Georgia, actually. And we had a longer conversation about grazing rights and conservation rights. So, if you got into your position, are you interested in writing any legislation or signing on for any legislation that would protect grazing rights in Georgia?
Absolutely. That's one of my main talking points is preserving farmland because when these data centers come, they are here to stay. It's not going to be in 10, 20 years, you're going to have your farmland and your beautiful trees and your beautiful gardens back. That's not what's going to happen. If anything, they are gonna be here to stay for who knows how long, you know what I'm saying? And why should they leave? When you have lawmakers that are, bending over and allowing these data centers to do whatever they want, whenever they want, then of course they're gonna take advantage of that. But in terms of that legislation, absolutely, protecting farmland is a main priority for me.
Well, I'm a farmer myself. My family's been farming in Indiana for a very long time, and I
Oh,
do think
wow.
yeah, it gives people a different perspective, right? Like,
Yeah.
I also ran a big chunk of my campaign when I was running on farm issues because I felt like, they're just eviscerating the American farmer right now. Um, are there any other progressive candidates bouncing around Georgia that you feel confident that you guys might be able to pass some legislation like that, that maybe other people should also be looking at?
I do think that there's progressive candidates, but unfortunately, the majority right now is Republican.
Mm,
So, unfortunately, when, bills are passed that would be objectively good for the state of Georgia, they are
mhm.
often turned down. They don't make it past committee. So, there are some good progressive candidates, but for me, like on day one, I'm focusing on the data center issue. Day one, I want to eliminate the special tax break that data centers are receiving because right now it has amounted to billions of dollars that they are receiving in tax breaks. And what that means is I will have to partner and team up with the Republicans that are, opposing the data centers. There is very few, but there are a few of them that are opposing it. So I would have to work across the aisle to make that happen.
I actually think there are more than you think. Maybe not in Georgia, but there definitely seems to be a momentum. I'm actually one of those, probably also because I come from a very red area, that I see the need, right? Like, it's like if you can pick a few things to get people on board for the American people, right? And if you can table some of the other issues for a bit later. What sort of argument would you make to some of your Republican constituents or your Republican partners in the state to say, "Hey, listen, let's bridge the gap here. We're here for Georgians. We're here for Americans. Let's get this done."
Absolutely. The number one thing that I would say, let's put the culture war aside. We all know that it's not proactive. We all know that it's not sustainable. If we are the number one country in the world when it comes to freedom of expression, then we need to be that. You know what I'm saying? If your religion doesn't allow you or, you don't believe in something, that is a personal opinion. We should not be wasting taxpayers' time and money to focus on social issues that will not even stay in place for long because as soon as they pass a bill that's anti-trans or voting rights. It's lawsuits happen. It's not good press at all. It's actually making the Republican Party look really bad right now. So we need to focus on, addressing the invasion of data centers on rural communities because unfortunately when it comes to Georgia, it's all about Atlanta, 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 but it needs to be about more rural communities all across the state. And that's what I'm bringing is a fresh sense of leadership that's going to address that.
Well, let's talk a bit more about your nonprofit because you mentioned that you were a nonprofit executive. Can you tell us a little bit about your nonprofit and what do you guys do?
Absolutely. So my nonprofit is called This Doesn't Define Me. It was founded on the principle that let me tell you the backstory. So there was a point in my life where I was diagnosed with PTSD. And I had walked out the doctor and I was like, I don't even know what this means. I have this diagnosis in my hand, like on a piece of paper. Like, what does this mean? You know what I'm saying? Like, because there's no real way to treat it. Um, so I started talking and using my voice and what I found is, I can use the diagnosis to be able to relate to people across the aisle, like veterans, other trans people, because this affects a lot of people, all across the nation, all across the globe. So I found it was at first a project because I wanted to be like, I'm a woman struggling with PTSD. This doesn't define me. But then I realized, there were a few points in my life where I could not afford to have access to therapy and healthcare. So, right now we are serving trans and marginalized people all across the Southeast. So we have community partners that we give hygiene kits to that are feeding the homeless. We have our new bridge fund that helps bridge the gap for trans people to have access to therapy and gender affirming care and transportation. But it's not only trans people, it's also marginalized people. So it could be like any person that is experiencing homelessness or like a mental health emergency. It's just a small way for us to be like, we're here for you and we understand your struggle. It might not be a lot that we can do, but it's definitely something.
Well, I think that's really important. I was having a conversation with someone recently about the unhoused, and I just said to them, listen, like, these are our neighbors. You know, almost every single American I know is very close to being in an unhoused situation themselves. And we can't continue to look at these people as other, unservable, because we could easily be them. So I think if we start to do that, and we definitely need more programs like yours. Because I don't think enough people are speaking to that. So I'm really proud of you that you are.
Thank
And
you.
I mean, yeah, bless you, honestly, because there's so many people struggling right now.
Yeah, and I have a new series for my campaign. It's called Canvas and Chronicles. And the first person that I said I want to interview is someone that's called Brandon McCoy. And they feed the homeless 7 days a week, 4 hours. Like I've gone and, seen it happen. And, so I wanted people to see the disparities in real life and to actually put a face to it. Because, like you said, like in today's economy, everyone is just one paycheck away, one bad emergency, one bad business deal from being out on the streets. Because to re enter life in America, I mean, you have to have a credit score, you have to have, an address, you have to have, so many moving parts for you to be able to really re enter life and, really fend for yourself. So I absolutely agree that we need to give more visibility to this and humanize these people because just the reactions that I've had in interviewing these people is, well, homelessness is a choice and, disparities are, that's, it's not a choice. Who would choose to be in that position?
I struggle with people that can't see the humanity in things like that. I think it often takes like lived experience, right? Like you have to have someone that you know or that has touched your organization, your life in some way to make an impact. I think it's much easier to say, "Oh, those people over there." So, how would you bring your district maybe a little closer to that fight? Like, what ways do you think you could advocate for the unhoused community in a different way to actually force change in Georgia?
Well, I think for one, I have to address what's going on at the Capitol right now. So, our governor just cut $300 million from essential programs that were going to homeless people, that were going to disabled veterans, that were going to our K-12 program. So, the Republican solution is to snip, 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 and cut everything. That's not what we need to do. I think my number one course of action would be to end the special tax breaks so that we can raise billions of dollars to our tax revenue. And then from there, expand, more government contracts so that we can actually reach people on the ground. Because unfortunately, a lot of these charities nowadays are set up like corporations. It's just visibility, visibility, visibility. People are getting paid huge amounts of salaries to do a supposed mission statement, but it's not actually reaching people on the ground that need it at the local level. So what I want to see happen is definitely more investment from the government, um, helping these organizations that are helping people on the ground.
Well, I don't know if I told you this, but I run a nonprofit myself, and that is something I really struggle with because I'm like, everybody does wonder, where's the money going, right? And, like,
Right.
I've done the majority of the financing of my very small nonprofit, and, I was shocked whenever I heard that from people that, like the majority of the money that's going into some of these larger nonprofits is just going to salaries and it doesn't trickle down.
Yeah.
And so I was like, really? Especially for organizations that deal with things like, feeding the homeless, feeding the unhoused, trying to house them, giving them, you know, actual things that they need. So I'm really glad that you're addressing that, honestly. Let's talk a little bit more about your family and yourself because it would seem like you've got a big team around you. So let's give all of them a little shout out.
Well, I had a very small, close-knit family. I have one brother and two sisters, and they all have kids. My siblings are all about to be 40, so I'm definitely the baby in the family. Um, I was raised by two immigrant parents that are small business owners, so I always have the small business owner mentality. I'm always going to be pro private property rights and home ownership because luckily my entire family were blessed enough to have homes. But we were able to purchase a home at a time where it was more affordable. And unfortunately, right now it's like, can I even afford a home? Like that's where I'm at right now because things have just gotten the way that they are. So, yeah, and I would, give a shout out to just everyone in my corner all across the nation that are supporting me from, afar, but also to local candidates that don't necessarily, you know, fit the same type of demographic as me. I'm so blessed to have I'm just gonna say it like white cis hetero men, a county over that support me and that, will give me, a little powwow here and there. So I would like to give a shout out to Chris Harden, who is our Democratic nominee for Congressional District 11, Jason Tanner in Cherokee County, and Lauren Jones here in Cartersville. They've all been so supportive.
That's awesome, and I actually really love to hear that you've got some, straight white male support because you don't hear that all the time,
Yeah.
you know? It's really good to see that, especially, um, seeing that there's so much bad going on in the patriarchy. I love to see these guys bust out and actually, step outside of that box, so I'm really happy to hear that.
Yeah, no, they're awesome. I think that strangely, like, we have all just become so close because it's like we live so close together and, we kind of go through the same thing of dealing with people around here because it can feel like you're talking to a wall sometimes when you're approaching some people and rural communities because they've been so conditioned to believe in a certain way. So, but I believe that instead of demonizing them, we have to empathize and realize that you know, a lot of them don't realize that they're being stolen from. You know what I'm saying? Because that's the only way that I can describe it when when the people that represent them are being funded by corporations and, of course their interests are going to go to them rather than to the everyday people. So your voice has been stolen. And for that, I empathize.
Yeah, I agree with you. I also really struggled with that. I come from a very Republican family. And to watch how things have played out in this country with that is extremely frustrating, right? Especially if you're part of the LGBTQ plus community and you're from a Republican family. You're like, hold on a second. Like all of these values that you taught me whenever I was a kid, like things aren't really being applied that way. Like I remember a time whenever the Republicans were talking about small government and all that sort of thing. So let's speak on that a bit. I'm sure you're getting a lot of that right now.
Oh, yeah. Luckily, I'm proud to say that my family is very accepting. They might not agree with every single thing that I do, but they accept who I am and they will defend me to the end. And for that, I'm grateful because I've heard horror stories of, you know, queer kids, their families will burn their pride flag in the yard. Like I've heard that before, like around here. So it's definitely disheartening to hear that and, that's something that I always try to tell people. I'm like, you know what? Like, you need to do what you can to be in a better situation, but also like therapy. Like, even if you don't think that you need it, you probably do because having to deal with that and, that affects, your dating life and your friendships because you learn not to trust people. So I've actually, yeah, I've definitely heard horror stories of that. And those are the same people that are preaching the Bible. So
Well, you got that right. I don't know if you've seen this movie, but I just heard about it and I watched it the other day and it was pretty amazing. Called 1946, and it's talking about essentially how they mistranslated a section of the Bible. And apparently there's this whole movement. And I'm like, I wish I knew about this a few years ago, because coming from a very rural area where there's churches on every corner, which I'm sure is probably very similar down there, just thinking to yourself that a few people in a room a long time ago made a bad decision that then affected the rest of us in the way that it did, that leads to things like you're talking about. Like, I don't think a lot of people know just how many young members of the LGBTQ plus community struggle with things like that and unfortunately lose their lives because of it.
yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a real issue because I am hearing of people that are taking their own life, and I have unfortunately, been there a few times in my own life. So I definitely empathize with people that, are struggling through that. For me personally, my mom tried to be religious. She wasn't very religious growing up, but one thing that I remembered was every time that we would go to a church, it would be like, "Oh, everything's amazing, everything's great." And then one day they would be like, "Oh, you need to speak out against the LGBTQ people in your community." And I'm like, "Oh my God, like seriously?" Like right when I think I found the perfect church, this happens. So I didn't start finding religion until like very recently because I discovered that there's actually a lot of there's few, but there's, it is a good number amount of accepting churches and more progressive churches in Georgia that do not weaponize or encourage, hate against people's identity. So that's always a plus.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. I think we're still a work in progress up here. We've got a governor and a lieutenant governor that are preaching hate right now. So we've got some significant work to do, but I'm at least happy that I'm hearing good things from Georgia. So, is there anything else in particular that you want to talk about as far as platform or goals that you have for state office?
I think I think we hit it really well. I think we just talked about data centers. We talked about, LGBTQ rights. For me, I'm just all about protecting people's privacy. Unfortunately, we have a rise of flock cameras. I'm not sure if that's a thing where you're from, but we have a rise of flock cameras. And for me, I'm kind of suspicious because I'm like, okay, there's a rise of flock cameras, which is a privately owned company that can sell out to any big conglomerate at any time, which would open us up to having our information to them, but which will probably be sold to advertisers. And at the same time, we have data centers that store data. So I'm like, okay, this is kind of seeming like they're building this to, have more surveillance over us. And I think it's something that should be alarming to people all across the state and all across the nation because we have to question like, who are these companies funded by? Are they public? Are they private? Are they traded on the stock market? One thing that I recently discovered was our utilities company, Georgia Power, is traded on the New York Stock Exchange, which makes a lot of sense considering that they're weaponizing eminent domain, taking people's homes, literally undervaluing the check that they give people after they demolish their home and these people are left paying, an excess amount of property taxes still, or, they're under the water on their home because the corporation weaponized eminent domain and bulldoze their house. So,
Yeah, I actually read a story about a gentleman down there. Um, his family had been his farm had been in his family for several generations, and they had decided they were going to put a corporate airstrip, a corporate airport in that area, and he didn't have a whole lot that he could say about it. And the article was talking about how he was going to have to clean out his shed, and Anybody that knows farmers knows if you've got 70 or 80 years of farm equipment, you can't just move that at the drop of a dime. Also, whenever you're, you know, cutting someone's grazing land in half and they have cattle, I mean, you don't have enough land. So then that means that you have to get rid of your cattle. I mean, if you have new calves and stuff like that, that means you have to get rid of them. And often, if you have to get rid of them fast, you're doing it at a deficit, like at a discount to yourself, which is not beneficial for anybody. So, yeah, I don't know a ton, but I know enough about Georgia that it seems to be mirroring Indiana in some of those ways with with the data centers, with utility companies, with access to water. Um, they're throwing those things up here so fast that we can't count, basically. Like every time you turn around, they're petitioning for another small town near a big water source, near an aquifer, near some of our natural resources. That seems to always be the places that they go. And they always seem to do it on farmland. So that is definitely something close to my heart. I'm glad that you're fighting for that. The only thing that we didn't really touch on was disability rights. So, being that this is also a disability podcast, I just want to let you cook on that for a bit. So, tell everybody about your background with disability and how you're going to advocate for the disability community in the state of Georgia.
Well, I actually technically have a disability because I have a speech impediment. I don't know if you've noticed it, but I stutter a lot. So, for me, it's something that I've been a lot more vocal about because my job is basically speaking all the time. And, I think people start to pick it up like after a while and they're like, is there something wrong with you? Why do you stutter a lot? I'm like, I've always stuttered. You know what I'm saying? So for me as a state candidate, I'm also simultaneously raising awareness to that and saying that, hey, like if you have a speech impediment, you absolutely can run for office and, don't be afraid to speak. Don't be afraid to speak. So, yeah. But I would definitely say, like, when it comes to disability, I would definitely say I advocate for expanded Medicaid and access to health care for the disabled people. You know, accessibility is also a big thing that we need to put an emphasis on, because a lot of buildings and a lot of, sidewalks are not accessible for disabled people. So we need to make sure that that is a priority, especially in metro hotspots like Atlanta, where there's a lot of different moving parts. People are getting on buses and people are getting on trains and the MARTA. So there definitely needs to be an emphasis on accessibility.
Well, I agree with you. I hope that you'll win. Obviously, I hope that you'll bring a good level of disability awareness and justice to the state of Georgia, as well as expanding on LGBTQ plus issues. I think we definitely need some strong advocates in there. So, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. Was there anything else that you wanted to tell people today?
No, just support my campaign at bellaforga.com. Follow me on Instagram at bellaforga.com or not .com, bellaforga. And thank you so much for having me on the podcast. And I am a fighter. I'm ready to fight and let's get this done.
Okay, I'm going to ask you the same question that I ask everybody. Um, who is Bella? At the core, who's Bella? What do you want people to take away from this podcast if they don't remember anything else but this thing?
I want them to know that Bella is a confident fighter and that Bella will not back down to any corporations or any billionaire because my mouth and my body cannot be bought by them. So a vote for Bella is a vote to have a fighter on the front lines, someone who's always going to do what's right, someone who's always going to advocate for the right thing. And above all, I have no intention of using my religion or my identity to legislate anything. I believe in doing what works for all people and being a community-driven person. So that is who's Bella. I'm a fighter, and if elected, I'm going to fight to the very end.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you very much, Bella, for coming on. We very
Thank
much appreciate it,
you.
and good luck.
Thank you so much.
We are at a pivotal point in American history. We do not have the luxury to remain silent. Programs are disappearing every day. We hope that this podcast raises awareness and sparks a sense of advocacy in you. We all can make a difference. The important thing is to start. See you next time.